Hey, I've been lurking here for a while, but after what happened, I need to get this off my chest. I'm not looking for pity or advice. I just need to vent, I guess. If you stick around and read the whole thing, maybe you'll understand why I'm so messed up right now. So, I guess I should start by saying that I've always been a curious person. Like, really curious. The kind of person who'd poke a bear just to see how it reacts. It's a flaw, I know. But it's also what led me down a path I can't escape from. A path that cost me more than I could have imagined. It all started about a year ago. I was in a bad place, mentally and financially. My job sucked, my girlfriend had just dumped me, and I was spending way too much time online trying to distract myself from my shitty reality. You know how it is. Endless YouTube videos, Reddit threads, and random rabbit holes that lead to nowhere. But then I stumbled upon something that caught my eye. The dark web. I'd heard of it before, of course. Everyone has. It's that shadowy part of the internet where you can find anything and everything if you're brave, or stupid, enough to look. Drugs, weapons, hitmen, even human trafficking. It sounded like bullshit, just urban legends to scare people away. But I'm not the kind of guy who just believes everything he hears. I needed to see it for myself. I spent days researching how to access the dark web. Tor browser, VPNs, onion links, the whole 9 yards. I'm not a tech genius or anything, but I can follow instructions, and eventually I found myself on a dark web marketplace. It was like eBay, but for illegal shit. Guns, drugs, counterfeit money, you name it. And then there were the forums. The forums were what really hooked me. People talking about things you wouldn't believe. I'm talking about organ harvesting, human experimentation, torture live streams. It was like a car crash. You know you shouldn't look, but you can't turn away. The more I read, the more curious I got. One night, I found myself on a thread titled Red Room Invite. For those who don't know, a Red Room is supposedly a live-streamed torture session where viewers can pay to watch someone get hurt, or worse. I'd read about them before, but always figured it was a myth, something made up to scare the gullible. But this thread claimed to have a link to a real one, happening in just a few hours. All I had to do was pay a small fee in Bitcoin to get access. I hesitated. I mean, I'm not a monster. The idea of watching someone get tortured made my skin crawl, but at the same time, I was curious. What if it was real? What if this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see something no one else could ever see? That stupid curiosity of mine won out, and before I knew it, I'd transferred the Bitcoin and received a message with the link. The hours leading up to the event were the longest of my life. I kept questioning what the hell I was doing, but I couldn't bring myself to back out. When the time finally came, I clicked the link with shaking hands. The screen went black for a moment before a video feed flickered to life. The quality was shit, grainy and pixelated, but I could make out a small, dimly lit room. There was a chair in the center, and someone was sitting in it. A man, maybe in his 40s, with a bag over his head and his hands tied behind his back. He was trembling, and even though I couldn't see his face, I could tell he was terrified. I felt sick to my stomach. This was real. Too real. I wanted to close the window, but I couldn't. It was like my hand was frozen on the mouse. The chat box beside the video was blowing up with people placing bets on what would happen next. What kind of fun the host had in store for the poor bastard in the chair. Then, the host appeared. He was wearing a ski mask and holding a knife. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like I was hypnotized, completely enthralled by the horror unfolding before my eyes. The host started talking, his voice muffled by the mask. He told the man in the chair that his life was about to end, and that the viewers, us, had paid good money to see it happen. Then, he yanked the bag off the man's head, revealing his face. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. It was pure, unfiltered terror. He knew he was going to die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed my laptop shut and ran to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before I puked my guts out. I was shaking, sweating, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What the fuck had I just done? What the fuck had I just watched? I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about that man's face, those terrified eyes staring back at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line, that I'd done something truly unforgivable. But at the same time, a part of me was still curious. A part of me wanted to see more, to know how it ended. The next day, I tried to go about my life like normal, but I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think about was that red room. I wanted to talk to someone about it, to confess what I'd done, but who the hell would I tell? My friends would think I was insane, and the cops, well, that was out of the question. I was stuck with this nightmare, and there was no way out. I tried to stay away from the dark web after that, but the curiosity wouldn't let me. I kept wondering if there would be another red room, another chance to see something I shouldn't. I know it sounds fucked up, but that's the truth. It's like an addiction. Once you get a taste, you can't stop. You need more, and more is exactly what I got. But I'll save that for part 2. This is only the beginning, and things get a whole lot worse from here. Trust me, you won't believe where this story goes next. A few days after watching that red room, I found myself back on the dark web, despite every rational part of my brain screaming at me to stop. I was on autopilot, scrolling through forums, skimming threads, not even sure what I was looking for. I think I was just hoping I'd find something that would explain what I'd seen, maybe even make me feel better about it. But instead, I found something much worse. It was late, like 3 a.m. late, when I stumbled upon a thread titled Custom Red Rooms. The post claimed that, for the right price, you could commission your own red room, tailor-made to your sickest desires. They were offering the chance to be the puppet master, to pull the strings and decide how someone else's nightmare would play out. The post was full of testimonials from people who had supposedly done it before, raving about how it was the ultimate thrill, the kind of experience that would haunt your dreams in the best way possible. It was disgusting, horrifying, but I couldn't look away. I kept reading, feeling my stomach churn with each word. And then, before I knew what I was doing, I sent a private message to the poster. I swear, I didn't intend to go through with it. I just wanted to know more, to see how deep the rabbit hole really went. But within minutes, I got a reply. The guy was quick, straight to the point. He didn't ask me what I wanted. He told me. He laid out a menu of options, each one more fucked up than the last. Torture methods, weapons, the number of participants involved. It was like shopping for groceries, except every item was another level of depravity. And then he asked me how much I was willing to pay. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knew I should stop, close the browser, and never look back. But I was in too deep, like I was hypnotized. I typed out a number, way too much money for someone in my situation, and hit send. The response was almost immediate. He accepted my offer, said he'd send me the link to the private stream within the next 48 hours. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold sweat break out across my forehead. What the fuck had I just done? I didn't sleep for the next 2 days, barely ate, just sat there in my shitty apartment, staring at my laptop like it was a ticking time bomb. Every time I heard my phone buzz, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I was paranoid, convinced that any minute now, the cops would come busting down my door. Or worse, that whoever was on the other end of that thread would come for me. But nothing happened. The hours dragged by, and I started to wonder if maybe it was all just a sick joke, a scam to steal my money. Then, at exactly 1 a.m. on the second night, I got the link. I can't even describe the mix of emotions I felt as I clicked on it. Fear, excitement, disgust, curiosity. It was all there, churning in my gut like a toxic cocktail. The video feed loaded slowly, the screen flickering to life with that same shitty quality as before. Only this time, the room was different. It was darker, smaller, with plastic sheets covering the walls and floor, like a Dexter-style kill room. In the center of the room was a chair, and in that chair was a person. I say person, because I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. They were blindfolded, gagged, and tied down so tightly that I could see their wrists turning purple. Their chest was heaving, breaths coming in ragged, panicked gasps. The host stepped into view, wearing the same ski mask as before. He didn't say anything, just stood there for a moment, letting the anticipation build. The chat box was lighting up with messages, people placing bets again, egging him on. My stomach twisted as I realized they were waiting for me to give the order. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just any red room. This was my red room. I had paid for this. I had made this happen. The host turned to the camera, tilting his head slightly as if to ask, "What now?" The chat was going wild, but I couldn't move. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the mouse steady. I wanted to close the window, to shut it all down, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, staring at the screen like a deer caught in headlights. And then I did something I'll never forgive myself for. I typed 2 words into the chat: start slow. The host nodded, as if he'd been expecting that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife. It wasn't a big, dramatic weapon, just a simple blade, but in that moment, it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. He walked up to the person in the chair and gently placed the knife against their cheek, dragging it down slowly, just enough to draw a thin line of blood. The muffled screams that came from the gag were unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was pure, animalistic terror. The kind of sound that gets under your skin and sticks with you long after it's over. The host kept going, carving shallow cuts into the person's skin, methodically, almost lovingly. The chat was going wild, people typing out their sick requests, but I couldn't look away. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like I was going to throw up, but unable to stop watching. This went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The person in the chair was a bloody mess by the time the host finally stepped back, admiring his work. He looked at the camera again, waiting for my next command, and that's when I finally snapped out of it. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I ran to the bathroom, feeling the bile rise in my throat, and threw up everything in my stomach. I was trembling, sweating, on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. What the hell had I done? What kind of monster had I become? I spent the rest of the night curled up on the floor, too terrified to move, too disgusted with myself to even think straight. I kept hearing those screams in my head, seeing that knife, that blood. I wanted to rip my brain out, to scrub those images from my mind, but they were burned in there, like a brand. And the worst part? I knew it wasn't over. I knew that even if I deleted everything, wiped my computer, and never went back to the dark web again, it wouldn't change what I'd done. It wouldn't change the fact that, somewhere out there, a person was suffering because of me, because of my curiosity, because I couldn't fucking stop. But of course, it didn't end there. Things got worse, a lot worse. After that last Red Room, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even look at myself in the mirror without feeling disgusted. The screams, the blood, the way the host had looked at the camera, like he was waiting for my next sick command, it all haunted me. But the worst part was the guilt. I kept thinking about that person, the one tied to the chair, the one I'd hurt. I didn't know who they were, where they were, or if they were even still alive, but I knew it was my fault. All because I was too curious, too fucking stupid to stay away. I tried to bury it, to pretend it never happened. I deleted the messages, wiped my browser history, and told myself I'd never go back to the dark web. But it was like trying to erase a stain with dirty water. It just kept spreading, seeping into every part of my life. I started drinking, hoping it would numb the guilt, but it only made things worse. I'd get drunk and start seeing things. Flashes of that room, the knife, the blood. I couldn't escape it. Then the messages started. It was a week after the last Red Room when I got the first one. It popped up on my phone in the middle of the night, just a simple text from an unknown number. "You enjoyed that, didn't you?" I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. Who the hell was this? Was it a sick joke? But deep down, I knew exactly who it was. It was them. The people from the dark web, the ones who ran the Red Rooms. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just stared at the message until my screen went dark, then shoved my phone under my pillow like that would make it go away. But it didn't. The next day, I got another message. "We know who you are." I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything except wait for the next message. They came at random times, always from different numbers, but the meaning was clear. They were watching me. They knew what I'd done, and they weren't going to let me forget it. It got worse from there. I started noticing things, small things at first, like my mail being opened before I got to it, or my apartment door being slightly ajar when I knew I'd locked it. Then there were the sounds. Footsteps outside my window at night, the creak of my front door, voices whispering just out of earshot. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every little noise, convinced that someone was there, waiting to strike. And then, one night, they did. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of my front door creaking open. I was half asleep, groggy, and at first, I thought it was just another one of those sounds that had been haunting me for weeks. But then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, getting closer and closer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I reached for my phone, but it was dead. I must have forgotten to charge it. I was completely alone, trapped in my own apartment with God knows who or what coming for me. I tried to stay calm, tried to think rationally, but all I could hear were those footsteps. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting, praying that it was just a nightmare, that I'd wake up any second. But then the door slowly creaked open, and I knew this was no dream. A figure stepped into the room, a dark silhouette against the faint light coming from the street outside. I couldn't make out any details, just that it was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing some kind of mask. My first instinct was to scream, but my throat was dry, like I'd swallowed sand. I couldn't make a sound. I just lay there, frozen, as the figure walked slowly toward my bed. When it reached me, it stopped, standing there like it was savoring the moment. Then, in one quick motion, it grabbed me by the throat and yanked me out of bed. I tried to fight back, but it was like punching a wall. Solid, unyielding, and completely unfazed. The figure slammed me against the wall, pinning me there with one hand while the other reached into its pocket. That's when I saw the knife. It was the same one from the red room. I recognized the blade, the way the light glinted off it, the way it seemed to hum with some kind of dark energy. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what the hell was happening. Was this the host? Had they tracked me down? Or was it someone else? Some sick fuck who'd watched the stream and decided to take it a step further. The figure leaned in close, its masked face inches from mine, and whispered in a voice that sent chills down my spine. "This is for them," and then it stabbed me. The pain was instant, blinding, like a hot poker being driven into my side. I screamed, finally finding my voice, but no one was there to hear me. The figure pulled the knife out and stabbed me again, this time in the shoulder, then again in my leg. It wasn't trying to kill me, not yet. It was toying with me, just like in the red room. I don't know how long it went on. It felt like hours, each stab a fresh wave of agony. I tried to fight back, tried to kick, punch, anything to get away, but I was too weak, too broken. I could feel the blood pouring out of me, soaking into the carpet, warm and sticky. My vision started to blur, darkness creeping in at the edges, and then, just when I thought it was over, the figure did something I'll never forget. It pulled out its phone and started recording. I could see the screen, the image of my own battered, bloody face staring back at me. It wasn't just recording, it was streaming. I was the next Red Room, the next sick fucking show for those monsters to watch. That's when I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, bandages covering half my body. The nurses told me I'd been found barely alive, bleeding out in my apartment. They didn't know who'd done it, said the cops were investigating, but I knew they'd never find anything. Whoever had come for me was too smart, too careful. They'd planned it all out, just like I had when I'd ordered that red room, but they'd left me alive. And that's the worst part. Because now, I'm living with the knowledge that they're still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I can't sleep, can't eat, can't do anything except wait for that inevitable day when they finish what they started. But maybe that's what they want. Maybe they're just dragging it out, letting the fear fester, feeding off it like the parasites they are. Or maybe they're giving me a chance to tell my story, to warn others about the dangers of curiosity. Because if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that some things are better left unseen, some doors better left unopened. After I woke up in the hospital, I was in a bad way. I'm talking physically, mentally, emotionally. Every possible way you could be messed up, I was there. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a walking corpse. I was barely holding it together, constantly on edge, jumping at every little noise, every shadow that moved in the corner of my eye. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure, the one who'd turned my own apartment into a goddamn torture chamber. I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to finish what they'd started. The cops were useless. They took my statement, asked a bunch of questions, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. They thought I was just some paranoid junkie who'd gotten himself into trouble. And maybe they were right. But that didn't change the fact that I was being hunted by something far worse than any drug dealer or gang member. This was different. This was personal. I spent weeks in the hospital, recovering from the stab wounds, but the real damage was on the inside. I couldn't sleep without seeing that masked figure, hearing their voice in my head, whispering those words. This is for them. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that room, back in that moment, the knife sinking into my flesh over and over again. I started refusing painkillers, refusing sleep aids, anything that would make me lose control, even for a second. I needed to be alert, needed to be ready for when they came back. And they did come back, but not in the way I expected. It was the night before I was supposed to be discharged from the hospital. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't used my phone much since the attack, but every time it went off, I was convinced it was another message from them. And this time, I was right. The text was simple. You're next. My blood ran cold. I sat up, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what it meant. They weren't done with me, not by a long shot. But what could I do? I was trapped in this hospital room, surrounded by people who had no idea what kind of danger I was in. I thought about calling the cops, but I knew they'd be no help. I was on my own. Then, another text came through. Check the link. There was a link at the bottom of the message, just like the ones I'd seen before, the ones that led to the red rooms. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone, but I had to see what they had sent me. I had to know. I clicked the link, and the browser loaded a video feed, just like before. But this time, the room on the screen wasn't some dingy basement or a plastic-covered kill room. It was my hospital room. My fucking hospital room, from the angle of the security camera in the corner. I felt the blood drain from my face. They were watching me, right then and there, and I hadn't even known it. The camera feed showed me sitting there on the bed, looking at my phone, the terror written all over my face. And then the camera panned slightly, revealing something I hadn't noticed. A shadow moving in the corner of the room, just out of sight. I whipped my head around, my eyes scanning the room, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, just as it had been a moment before. But the video feed was still showing that shadow, still creeping closer to the bed, like it was stalking me, like it was waiting for the right moment to strike. I jumped out of bed, ripping the IV out of my arm, my heart pounding in my ears. I grabbed the phone, trying to call for help, but my voice was caught in my throat. And then the screen went black. Not just the video feed, my entire phone shut down, like it had been remotely killed. Panic surged through me. I was alone, defenseless, with no way to call for help. I ran to the door, yanking it open, but the hallway outside was empty, eerily silent for a hospital. I felt like I was in some kind of horror movie, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I stumbled back into the room, my head spinning, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. And then I saw it. The reflection in the mirror. My mirror. At first, it looked like just a trick of the light, a smudge on the glass, but as I moved closer, it became clear. It was my own reflection, staring back at me with those wide, terrified eyes. But something was off. The reflection wasn't moving like I was. It was just standing there, staring back at me, unblinking. And then, slowly, it smiled. I felt a scream rising in my throat, but I couldn't let it out. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, as my reflection started to change. The smile widened, stretching far beyond what should have been possible, the skin around the mouth tearing as it did. Blood started dripping down its chin, staining the white hospital gown, and its eyes, my eyes, began to darken, turning into black, empty voids. I stumbled back, my legs giving out beneath me, and I hit the floor hard. The reflection leaned forward, pressing its hands against the glass, and I could hear the faint sound of something scraping, like nails on a chalkboard. It was trying to get out. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, and backed away from the mirror, but it kept coming. The glass started to crack, tiny spiderweb fractures spreading from where its hands pressed against the surface. And then, with a sound like shattering ice, the mirror exploded. Shards of glass flew everywhere, and I threw my arms up to protect my face, but it was too late. I felt a sharp pain in my left eye, followed by a warm, wet sensation trickling down my cheek. The pain was blinding, like a white-hot poker being driven straight into my skull. I dropped to the floor, screaming, clutching at my face, but I could already feel the blood pouring out, mixing with the tears. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't my reflection anymore. It was standing over me, tall, dark, and twisted, its face still wearing that grotesque, bloody smile. But this time, it wasn't behind the glass. It was real. It was here, in the room with me. I tried to crawl away, but it was no use. It reached down, grabbed me by the throat, and lifted me off the floor like I weighed nothing. The pain in my eye was unbearable, but I could still see it. Still see those black, empty voids staring back at me. I don't know how long it held me there, but it felt like an eternity. And then it leaned in close, so close that I could smell the blood and decay on its breath, and whispered the last thing I ever heard before I blacked out. An eye for an eye. When I woke up, I was in the operating room, the doctors hovering over me, shouting orders. I could feel the bandages wrapped tightly around my head, the pain still throbbing in my skull. They told me later that I'd been found unconscious on the floor of my hospital room, a shard of glass embedded in my left eye. They managed to save my life, but the eye was gone. I'm blind in one eye now, and every time I look in the mirror, I see the scar, a permanent reminder of what I've lost. But the worst part? I know it's not over. They took my eye, but they left me alive. They left me to suffer, to live in constant fear of what's coming next. And I know it's coming. I can feel it, like a storm building on the horizon. So, after the incident in the hospital, I was a wreck. Losing an eye isn't something you just bounce back from. It's not just the physical pain, the constant throbbing in my head, the disorientation, the way everything looked wrong with only one eye. It's the psychological toll. Every time I looked in the mirror, all I could see was the gaping hole where my left eye used to be, a jagged scar running down my face like a cruel joke. But more than that, I knew the nightmare wasn't over. I couldn't go back to my apartment. After I was discharged from the hospital, I stayed with a friend, a guy I'd known for years, someone I could trust. I told him I'd been attacked, that it was a random mugging gone wrong, but I left out the details. I couldn't bear to tell him the truth. And even if I had, I knew he wouldn't believe me. How could anyone believe the kind of shit I'd been through? For the first few nights, I barely slept. Every noise, every shadow, every creak of the floorboards sent me into a panic. I was convinced that they were coming for me, that the thing I'd seen in the mirror would find me again, would finish what it started. But as the days passed and nothing happened, I started to let my guard down. Just a little. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd seen the last of it. Maybe losing my eye was their final punishment, and now they were done with me. I was wrong. It was about a week after I left the hospital. My friend had gone out for the night, leaving me alone in his apartment. I was still on edge, but I'd managed to convince myself that I was safe, that the worst was over. I even dared to look at myself in the mirror, trying to get used to the sight of my ruined face. But as I stared at my reflection, something shifted, something in the background. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. But then I saw it again, a dark shape moving just out of sight behind me. My heart leaped into my throat, and I spun around, expecting to see that thing standing there, grinning at me with those black, empty eyes. But there was nothing, just an empty room. I turned back to the mirror, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a shadow. It was a person. No, not a person, something else, something wrong. It was standing right behind me, its face twisted into a grotesque parody of a human smile, its skin pale and stretched too tight over its skull. Its eyes were nothing but dark, hollow voids, and its hands were thin, skeletal claws. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, as it reached out, those long, bony fingers brushing against the back of my neck. I could feel its touch, cold and clammy, like the hand of a corpse. My skin crawled, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own body as it leaned in closer, its breath hot and rancid on my skin. And then it spoke. It's time. The voice wasn't human. It was a low, guttural rasp, like the sound of metal scraping against stone. The kind of voice that burrows into your brain and stays there, echoing in the darkest corners of your mind. Before I could react, the thing grabbed me by the throat and yanked me backward. I hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, but that didn't matter. I was too busy staring in horror as it loomed over me, pulling something out from behind its back. It was a scalpel. The blade gleamed in the dim light, razor sharp and menacing. I tried to scream, to kick, to fight back, but it was no use. The thing pinned me down with inhuman strength, one hand wrapped around my throat, squeezing just enough to cut off my air, while the other brought the scalpel closer and closer to my face. An eye for an eye, it hissed, the words dripping with malice. I struggled, gasping for breath, but I was helpless. I could only watch in terror as the scalpel hovered over my remaining eye, the cold steel grazing my skin. And then, with a quick, practiced motion, it plunged the blade into my eye socket. The pain was beyond anything I could have imagined. Blinding, searing, unbearable. I felt the scalpel twist, digging deeper, and I screamed, thrashing in its grip, but it was no use. The thing was methodical, precise, as it sliced through nerves, muscle, everything that connected my eye to my skull. And then, with a sickening squelch, it ripped the eye out. I could feel the blood pouring down my face, warm and sticky as the world went dark. My screams turned to choked sobs, the pain overwhelming every other thought, every other sensation. I was blind, completely and utterly blind, my world reduced to nothing but darkness and agony. But the thing wasn't done with me. Not yet. I felt its cold fingers on my face, tracing the lines of my jaw, the curve of my lips, almost tenderly. And then it leaned in close, so close that I could feel its breath on my skin, and whispered, "Now you see as we do." With those words, the darkness around me seemed to deepen, to close in on me, suffocating, oppressive. I could feel something changing inside me, something twisting, warping, as if the loss of my eyes had opened up a door to something far worse than blindness. And then it let me go. I don't know how long I lay there, on the floor of my friend's apartment, bleeding and broken, before he found me. I remember his screams, the way he called 911, how the paramedics rushed in, how they tried to save what was left of me, but it didn't matter. My eyes were gone, and with them, my connection to the world I'd known. Now, I'm in a different kind of hospital, one with padded walls and locked doors. They say I'm delusional, that the trauma made me hallucinate, that the thing I saw wasn't real, but I know the truth. I know that it's still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike again, because the darkness didn't leave when they took my eyes. It stayed with me, inside me, growing stronger every day. I can feel it, creeping through my veins, whispering in my mind, showing me things I shouldn't see. And the worst part? I know it's not over. I know that whatever they did to me, whatever they made me see, is just the beginning. They took my eyes, but they gave me something else in return, something far more terrifying. Now, when I close my eyes, I don't see nothingness. I see them, the ones who took my sight, the ones who stalk the dark corners of the web, the ones who revel in pain and suffering. They're there, always there, watching me, waiting for me to join them. And one day, I will. So, if you've read this far, let this be a warning. Stay away from the dark web. Stay away from the things that lurk in the shadows, the things that feed on your fear, your curiosity, your pain. Because once they find you, they never let go. An eye for an eye. And now, I'm theirs.